Hello everyone. My name is Muhammad Zikri Alfurqan. My student number is 2401905 I'm from class NK224. So today I want to make a podcast analysis. The podcast that I chose is contain a topic about music history, especially Britpop or British pop. So let's move into my summary. This podcast is entitled It Could Be You, The Battle of Britpop. This podcast retells the story of the rivalry between the two biggest Britpop bands in England, Blur and Oasis. This podcast describes how the rivalry at the time was not just about music. The rivalry at the time really divided the listeners and fans. The rivalry reached its peak when both bands released singles on the same day, Blur with the song Country House and Oasis with the song Roll With It. Both bands also symbolize different groups in society. Oasis represents the working class people from Manchester, and Blur represents the students of the University of the Arts in London. This competition is really heating up. Fans can wait to see who will win this competition because, according to fans, this competition is no longer just about music but has entered the realm of culture. And finally, what fans have been waiting for has arrived. The day of the chart topper announcement has finally arrived. On that day, a historic event occurred that truly shocked and delighted the fans. Blur managed to win this dispute by outselling Oasis, but Oasis did not stop and continued to soar their name with long-term success with their albums. Apart from that, this podcast also shows the relationship conditions of the members of each band with their rivals. Actions of mutual criticism continued to rain down, aided by the mass media, which at the time really highlighted the rivalry between the two bands. This act of teasing each other not only happened during interviews with the media crew, the members also threw insults at each other during award ceremonies. Whoever advances and wins the award will be a dig at the other bands who can only watch. This keeps happening over and over again, and the fans never get tired of seeing it. This act of mutual taunting sometimes leads into confrontation. This is very often shown by Oasis vocalist Liam Gallagher, who always makes fun of Blur vocalist Damon Albarn. This really entertained the fans and added to the intensity of the rivalry between the two bands. So, overall, this podcast successfully depicts how this rivalry works and shows how music can influence the wider community, not only in songs but also in cultural matters. So, let's move to the reflection. So, the first one is why I choose this podcast. The reason is I like music. Music has a huge influence on my life, especially in terms of emotions and spirit. Music can also connect people from different backgrounds, both cultural and generational. I really like music, especially Britpop music. This music not only presents instruments and melodies that are pleasant to listen to, but it also contains lyrics that relate to life, especially social conditions. That's why I chose this podcast episode, especially since this podcast discusses the biggest feud in Britpop history, where the two biggest bands at the same time competed for the top spot. This is really a big part of Britpop history, and I really love this story. Next is main message. The main message conveyed by this podcast is how big the impact of the dispute between two bands in Britain was, to the point of creating a culture war in society. Also, how this dispute ended with one band becoming the top of the music charts and beating the other band, but none of that really matters. The Blur and Oasis feud will always be the biggest feud between bands in the Britpop industry. I am very satisfied with this episode because it helps me as a young fan who doesn't feel the atmosphere of the feud between the two bands directly finds out what happened at the time. Next is language use. In the podcast, The Battle of Britpop, the speakers use many storytelling and other techniques to convey their ideas about the clash between the two bands. They also use terms that can help listeners better understand the podcast content. They can also convey their emotion well, well and making the listener indirectly feel the atmosphere of the feud between Blur and Oasis. The speakers also use metaphors and phrases to describe conditions and what is happening at the time, making this podcast more diverse in terms of language. Next is comprehension challenges. When I listen to podcast The Battle of Britpop, I found some challenges that help improve my understanding. The first one is unfamiliar accent. The speaker used a British accent because I am used an American accent. This made it a little difficult for me at first, but then it helped increase my focus. Next is blurred word boundaries. In some parts, the speaker speaks too fast and make his word a little unclear. Another challenge is the absence of the body language because this podcast is in audio format, which means I have to listen to it over and over again to get the emotion from the podcast episode. Several times the speaker also used local slang, which made me have to look up the meaning of the word. All these challenges helped me in developing my focus on listening skills. The last one is tone, pacing, and accent influence. From the speaker's delivery method, I can develop my listening skills little by little. This can be seen from the difference in accent. The use of a British accent by the speaker increased my understanding of how to read a word in another accent. Then, with the fairly fast pace of speaking, I had to train and improve my focus so as not to miss the information being conveyed. Then the speaker's intonation helps me to be more aware of what emotions the speaker is conveying so that we as listeners can also feel what is happening in the story being told. So that's it, everyone. Thank you very much for listening. I'm sorry for all the mistakes that I made. See you in the next change.